The Mirage IIICJ variant takes off for Israel in War Thunder. Let's see what this jet can do. As I've mentioned in a few of my other reviews, Israel was a major customer of French aircraft through the 1950s and 60s. The Mirage IIICJ version was the first conventionally supersonic aircraft operated by the Israeli Air Force and represented a major leap forward in combat capabilities over their inventory of earlier 1950s era designs. Roughly 70 Mirage IIICJs were built in France and delivered to Israel beginning in 1961, and a few were later resold to other export customers in the 1980s after a bit of a refurb. Overall, the CJ was very similar to the basic Mirage IIIC. Major changes included the removal of the rocket booster mounted under the tail, some alterations to the cockpit interior, and different electronic equipment better suited to the Middle East climate. Throughout the 1960s, the Israeli fleet of Mirage III jets saw extensive combat, both during scattered interception sorties and major conflicts. Israel was able to achieve air superiority during the Six-Day War in 1967 and also during the Yom Kippur War, partly due to their expert tactics and courageous flying with the Mirage IIICJ. The exact counts are difficult to verify because the sources, give different numbers, but during the Six-Day War, the Mirage III achieved a kill ratio of around 7-1, and during the Yom Kippur War, the Israeli Mirage IIIs achieved a kill ratio of somewhere between 4-1 and 20-1, depending on which tally you trust. But whatever the exact numbers, nobody argues that the aircraft proved itself in combat and quickly earned the respect it deserves. The famous Israeli ace Giora Epstein scored the majority of his shootdowns using the Mirage IIICJ, and is still the highest-scoring supersonic jet ace of all time. In War Thunder, the Mirage IIICJ is classed as a jet fighter in Rank 7 of the Israeli tech tree, with a battle rating of 10.0. The radar system includes the Cyrano radar set, which is functional but pretty basic. It's the same radar that the other Mirages have. It has a couple of angle presets, but no other real advanced features. There isn't any ballistics computer, and also no countermeasures, so that's a thing. The CJ gets a pretty basic set of loadouts, with air-to-air missiles and a couple options for bombs. No rocket pods or anything, and this plane isn't really meant for ground attack, but you can carry the pair of medium-sized bombs if you want to. The first missile you get is the basic Shafrir 2. This is an entry-level 10G missile, and isn't very competitive at the top tier. Thankfully, you replace this pretty quickly. The AIM-9D ends up being a much better weapon, and is probably what you're going to get the majority of your kills with in this plane. It's got an uncaged seeker and pulls at 18 Gs. Not the best, but far from the worst. You can also carry both versions of the Matra R530, the semi-active radar version, and the rear aspect infrared version. These have longer range than the Shafrir and Sidewinders, and the semi-aspect radar R530 ends up being quite useful in head-on engagements. They only turn at around 15 Gs, and these are more interception weapons than dogfight missiles. Now, the flight performance of the Mirage IIICJ won't let you down. It accelerates well, climbs pretty well, and has excellent maneuverability in shorter engagements. Like all pure Delta fighters, it pulls hard into high-speed turns, but it bleeds energy pretty fast if you're sustaining these maneuvers. There aren't any combat flaps or anything, but it has deployable air brakes if you need to dump some speed faster than the high-G turns can do for you. Flying the Mirage IIICJ out into missions is pretty straightforward, top-tier jet fighter stuff. The plane only has marginal capability for ground attack, so you're probably not going to be using this as close air support or as a strike fighter in air battles. You can fly out and dump your 2 bombs on something before you get into air combat. Maybe you're just grinding points. But as always, your performance is going to be in the toilet until you get rid of the bombs. Now for air combat sorties, there are a couple of things to consider. Firstly, the lack of countermeasures presents a bit of a problem, especially at higher altitudes. If you climb with this one, it's very likely that you'll just find yourself being a missile sponge, as the other team dumps half a dozen semi-active radar missiles in your general direction. My personal preference with this jet is to stay low at the opening phase of the match and just kind of go in with the pack, be a team player. The Mirage is maneuverable enough to hold its own in single-target engagements most of the time, and if you find yourself in a furball, don't be afraid to just throw out an AIM-9D as the opportunity comes up. My usual loadout is the semi-active radar-guided R530 and 2 AIM-9D missiles. This gives the option for attacking someone at longer range, or like a head-on pass entering into the merge, and it also gives the 2 dogfight missiles for close-in combat. The twin 30mm cannons that the Mirage gets can punch hard if you can hit with them, but the ammo load isn't too generous, so you're going to have to be picky with your shots if you plan to go gunslinger with this for more than just a couple of targets of opportunity. Visually, the Mirage IIICJ is a great-looking jet. As with the other Mirage versions in the game, the slick, tapered delta wing shape just looks like it should be fast. And it is. The default desert camo paint job isn't bad looking, but if you really want something else, you can find a few community-made skins that'll work. Now, landing the plane is basically the same as the other Mirage versions. No landing flaps, but effective air brakes. With the air brakes out and a low throttle setting, you can dump speed in a shallow dive, and you shouldn't really have any difficulty lining up clean approaches. The plane has a drag chute too, so once you touch down, the landing run is pretty short. The cockpit for the Mirage IIICJ isn't great, but it's not bad either. You get a radar B-scope and pretty decent visibility, but no visible radar warning receiver, no real HUD, and the radar scope is a bit lower than I personally prefer. Overall, it's a pretty average cockpit for a jet like this. To close out on the Mirage IIICJ, this plane has excellent maneuverability, good speed at all altitudes, and it's pretty easy to fly. However, the overall weapon load is a bit light. It doesn't have any countermeasures, and it dumps speed really fast in sustained maneuvers. The final verdict on the Mirage IIICJ is that in the current meta, this plane ends up being incredibly average, and the lack of countermeasures and the simplistic radar set are really what stops it from greatness. It's a good plane, and it's fun to fly. Just don't expect miracles. As always, thanks for watching.